Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our theme will be time versus material. And here I'm not talking about time on the chess clock, but I am talking about time as of gaining tempos, time on the chessboard, as of development or keeping your opponent busy. Well, let's get to it. Here is our game. This is an interesting game. It was a consultation game, something that used to be quite popular about a century ago, where, let's say, a famous master or grandmaster would play in consultation with an amateur player versus another professional or semi-professional and an amateur player. In this case, the masters were Janowski on the white side and Lasker on the black side, and each had a partner, perhaps, I'm not sure, making alternate moves, or they were consulting each move and kind of trying to decide together. Based on the moves, of course, especially of black in the game, I'm assuming that the two sides were playing alternate moves, or the master player didn't want to override all the time his partner. So the game started out with e4, e5, and white immediately played a gambit opening, which used to be extremely popular in the 19th or early 20th century. White played the Danish gambit by playing d4. Black captured, and here white has an option to capture black with the queen, which is not as bad as its reputation, or white also has the option to play knight f3 and in most situations transpose to a Scotch opening. However, in this game, white played the romantic style c3, playing a gambit. Of course, this wasn't a tournament game, but a friendly game among 4 people, so more risk is being taken, more is allowed than, I guess, 2 professionals would today, for sure. Now, black accepted the challenge and the pawn and took on c3. It's probably worth mentioning that d5 in this position is considered also a very reasonable and more conservative option than going for the gambit. So black captured on c3, and while here knight capturing back on c3 is certainly a reasonable option played in many games, the famous stylish move right now is bishop c4. Amazing, white sacrifices a second pawn, which black went for, and bishop captured back. So what do we see right now? We can tell that white has sacrificed 2 pawns, not just one, in order to gain time for development. Now these situations usually result very interesting position when one side is attacking and the other side is on the defense in hopes that he'll be successful, and then their material advantage will prevail later. And typically, if the side with the material advantage succeeds to exchange their queens while maintaining that material advantage, that usually guarantees a decisive advantage for that side. However, of course, the other side will try to do everything to avoid the exchange of the queens. Now, another very typical method to get out of passive position or a position where you're being attacked is to try to give back some or all of your material advantage in order to get quicker development and hold off the opponent's attack. Like in this case, theory considers a good choice to play d5, immediately giving up one of the 2 extra pawns that black had. And then, now we already opened the diagonal of black slide squared bishop, and then develop with knight f6, immediately trying to then trade the knight for the bishop on d5. Now, what black achieved is that if the bishop moves back, black is ready to exchange queens. And that is a huge success, as we discussed earlier. On the other hand, the tactic with bishop captures f7 is not as good as it seems, because after queen takes, a discovery check comes, when white's best choice is to retreat the queen, allowing bishop takes, knight takes, followed by rook e8 with an approximately even position. Let's go back to the game where black wanted to hang on to the material advantage further and played knight to f6. I personally not a big fan of this move because it allows the pawn to advance immediately to e5, and my rule of thumb is that when a knight on f6 can be attacked by a pawn and that knight cannot go to the center to e4 or d5, then generally it's not a good idea to allow the pawn push. In this case, it's obvious why the knight cannot go to d5 and it cannot go to e4 well either, because the white queen would be ready to move to d5, immediately attacking on f7 as well as the knight. After e5, the game continued, with black making a couple of intermediate moves before moving the knight. First one was bishop to b4 check. When white blocked the check with knight c3, even though putting his own knight into a pin. And here black continued by playing queen e7, pinning the pawn. Again, the same d5 idea was an option to counterattack, and if now pawn takes knight on f6, then even better than capturing the bishop on c4 would be to recapture on f6, and now white has two pieces hanging, the bishop and the knight. Moving away with a check to b5 wouldn't really solve the situation, because black would successfully block the check and again put white's bishop under attack. Let's go back again to the position after knight c3, and this is where black played queen e7, pinning that pawn on e5. Now comes the question, what should white do? Well, probably the best choice right now is to play queen e2, because that move not only protects the pawn on e5, but also unpins the pawn and therewith renews the threat of pawn capturing knight. White's choice was certainly interesting, but a lot riskier. White played knight g to e2, ignoring the threat to the pawn. While white certainly would have some compensation after queen takes pawn, it's debatable whether that would be sufficient. Remember, that would be already the third pawn that black would gain. And for the moment, white would not have a discovery jump with the knight from c3, because that knight is pinned. So white would have to waste a move to get out of the pin before that could become a threat. But in the meantime, black also would get the chance to move his queen away from a potential discovery threat. Black here made a mistake by moving the knight to e4. Black's idea was that since he's up 2 pawns already, let's exchange some pieces and get the game closer to an endgame. However, this was not the ideal choice. White castled, getting out of the pin. Now the black knight on e4 certainly is hanging, and black happily traded on c3. And in this position, certainly my first idea would be capturing back with the knight, with threats of then moving the knight to d5. I think white chose an inferior move by capturing with the bishop and indeed offering the exchange of bishops. And this is where black made a serious mistake, although a very natural move, but I think it was helping more white than it did black. Black should have just simply continued with developing and then castle. While white has compensation, again things wouldn't have been by far as bad as they became in the actual game. The game continued with bishop takes and knight takes back. So what do we see right now? Well, black is still 2 pawns up. We clearly see that. But we also see that white pretty much has completed the development. The 2 minor pieces that white still has on the board are beautifully located and fully developed. White has already castled, while black is completely behind in development. The queen side is still all stuck, and black still hasn't castled. In the meantime, white is ready to make aggressive and attacking moves with knight d5 or queen g4 and such. Clearly, black cannot capture the poisoned pawn on e5 because of the pin with the rook on e1, and also trying to prevent the white knight jumping to d5 would create other problems, namely in the weakness of the d6 square, where the white knight handily would jump there real quick through e4, and even after queen takes pawn now, knight d6, forking the king and the bishop, black would be in a resignable situation because either the king remains on the e-file when rook pins on e1, or the king walks to d8 hanging onto the bishop, allowing a family fork with knight takes f7, or if the king moves to f8, then simply knight takes bishop on c8. The game continued with a natural castling. Now these are the situations when it's quite important to play aggressively and not give the opponent the time to develop. And white proceeded correctly with knight d5, immediately attacking the queen as well as the pawn on c7, which in turn would end up trapping the black rook on a8. Now if black would retreat the queen to d8 to protect the pawn on c7, white could continue by playing queen h5. We can see how all the black pieces are pretty much on the queen side, far away to come to the king's help on the other side of the board. The best black can do right now is play d6, then white would trade and hurry up and bring the rook immediately to the game. And now black has different problems, most of all that the knight is threatening to jump depending where and how black continues, but white has an excellent compensation. For example, if bishop would move to e6, white would have the option to give a discovery with knight f6, or if the knight would move to c6, then knight b6 would be the problem. Black instead took on the gloves and captured the pawn on e5. But that gave white again extra time, putting the rook on an open file with a tempo by attacking black's queen. And in the meantime, the queen is busy hanging on to that c7 pawn, making sure not to lose the rook in the corner after that. So queen moved to d6, and white proceeded with queen h5. Now things will get real interesting. Now, for example, if black continues with knight c6, a natural developing move, white already would have pretty tactics. White could capture on c7 all of a sudden, and if queen captures, checkmate in 2, and Voila! Very nice. Even if after knight c6, knight c7, black does not capture on c7 immediately but plays g6 first, white would come out ahead after knight e8. And here after pawn takes and knight takes, even though black is still a pawn up, black has a lot of weaknesses, and by the time black would succeed to develop, black will surely lose another couple of pawns. The game continued with black playing c6, trying to chase the knight back. And these are the situations when if the knight would need to retreat, then black would get the chance, the time to get out of trouble. So it's really important to move forward and not backwards. And again, the idea is similar. Knight c7, beautiful move, trapping the rook in the corner. We already know if queen captures knight, then white checkmates into with queen takes f7. So black continued with g6, and just like in the previous variation, the queen goes to h6, and queen captured the knight. But now how can white continue? Well, this is one of those situations that you can feel, you can sense that because black is so much behind in development and the white pieces are as active as they are, there should be something. There should be a combination. And the most effective move right now is another sacrifice with the bishop. If rook captures bishop, the end is very quick after rook e8. So black better captures with the king. And now black is up a bishop and a knight and 2 pawns. But the king will never find its piece. Queen captured, king f6. At this stage, white has various ways to win. The most effective one would have been to play queen e7 check, and then simply capture the rook on f8, king g5, and then follow it up with bringing another piece to the attack with rook e4, threatening with the pawn advancement with h4, for example, after d5, h4, king h5, and then queen h8. Let me just show you how the game ended, which continued with queen h4 check, king g7, rook e7 check, rook blocked, queen d4 check, king f8, and now the beautiful queen h8 check, another sacrifice, giving the rook up, check, king d6, and an elegant epaulette mate on e5. Indeed, very, very nice. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. Here we go. What do we see in this position? Well, we see that white has a far advanced pawn on h6. However, we can also quickly discover that if white immediately pushes the pawn, the black rook will come right behind it and catch it. And then, even though white can protect his own pawn, black will have other pawns that can run away and at least save the game for black. So the question is, what should white do here to win the game, to prevent the rook from getting to the h-file behind that dangerous passed pawn that white has? Well, how can white control the h2 square? Well, only with the knight, but regardless where that knight goes, if he tries to control the h2 square, the knight can be captured. So what may be the solution still? I suggest you take a few minutes and try to figure it out on your own before you just listen to the solution. And the answer is moving the knight to g4, controlling the h2 square, and now the only way black can try to catch the pawn is by capture the knight. So then, if now h7 comes, again the rook arrives timely on h2. Of course, white shouldn't give the knight up on g4 unless they saw the follow-up move, which is the pretty bishop h3. So white gives up a second piece, all to close up that h-file from black's rook. And now, whether king takes bishop or doesn't, white follows up with h7, and the black rook arrives too late to the h-file to catch the pawn. Even though there may be some technical difficulties to win this endgame, white has a winning advantage after the pawn promotes. Well, a very beautiful endgame composed by Ring, and I truly enjoyed also the gambit game we saw in this lesson, where we saw how important time is and development of our pieces. Generally, try not to stay behind so much in development, rather give up some or all of your material advantage than to get under a serious attack as black did in the game we saw. Thank you for listening, and please be back next week for some more chess knowledge. Bye-bye.